Hello, my name is Michael Chambers, and many of you may know that I am taking legal action against English Catholic bishops and Opus Dei related people or entities for psychological abuse. And one of the interesting things that's come up in the case is I've been very fortunate to have the support of a current numerary who anonymously has been willing to publish in the public domain a witness statement which more or less backs up many of the points I've been making, that in fact there is no freedom in Opus Dei, or in terms of confession, spiritual direction, and various financial matters, and also sharing of information without consent. And so this is very important, and I'm hoping it's going to make a difference to the case, but also to the future of Opus Dei and its relations with the church, because this indicates very clearly that these matters still continue, and there is plenty of internal documents that are still in force today that show these things. Okay. And the first major point I want to make is talk about this idea of the bad shepherd. Now, this numerary in his statement reminded me of something which is talked about in Opus Dei, is that going to confession or spiritual direction outside Opus Dei, including to other Catholic priests, is going to the bad shepherd. And that was a term used by Escrivá. And obviously that doesn't sound good, does it? Calling the rest of the Catholic Church bad shepherds. And his point was that they don't understand. They don't understand us going our way. So obviously this doesn't look good or sound good to the Catholic hierarchy. If I was an Opus Dei press person, public relations person, I'd be trying to sort of say, oh, you have to look at the context. He was a forthright man of his time, and he was being very metaphorical. And of course, we love the church, and it wasn't really thinking. He was just making a specific point in context. But you know what we might do? We might rewrite all the centres and say that they shouldn't use that term anymore, so that you can rest easy now. Okay, so it wouldn't surprise me there'd be some sort of attempt at a cosmetic cover up if that issue of calling the other Catholic priests a bad shepherd comes to light. And obviously, I'm trying to bring it to light in whatever way I can. But the context is quite clear. This is read out in meditations, morning prayer, in centres for numeraries. Okay, so we're not talking about the wider Catholic Church. It's a message very much for them. And the reality is, and this is my next point, it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable for people of Opus Dei to go outside Opus Dei for spiritual direction or confession. You think about how people get in touch, first of all, with Opus Dei. Opus Dei offering formation, come to our talks, our meditations, come and speak to the priest, come and have spiritual direction, come and have regular confession. How many church organizations are offering that level of input on such a regular basis? Okay. And if you're young and you've got somebody saying, oh, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Great. Okay. Someone's giving me a bit of direction in my life. So maybe some young people are savvy enough to think, well, that doesn't sound right, or they have a sufficient experience of other parts of the Catholic Church to balance it and think, yeah, this is a bit heavy, okay. But there'll be large numbers of young people who'll be thinking that's wonderful, I'm getting real, or even older people, who are a bit lost in life, real direct attention here on a regular basis, feel grateful for it. And not to say that there's no sincerity there, but the reality is, over time, then it's not something that you're missing. This freedom to go elsewhere is not something that you're missing. Okay, so somebody says to you, "Do you know what? You've got the freedom to go to any other spiritual director or confessor. Why don't you exercise it?" And they'll say, "Well, I don't need to. It's not. What's the point? That's unthinkable. My way is Opus Dei." You know, um, these other people, they're probably going to be once every few months, and they're not going to be as clear, or I don't know, and they're not going to understand me. So this idea that it's unthinkable, it's a real thing. It's a real thing, okay? But of course, that very word should raise huge alarm bells in anybody with real pastoral knowledge and experience, okay? Because the reality is, once you go into spiritual direction once a week, once a fortnight, and it's very directive, you are becoming dependent on somebody. You're dependent on somebody else for your spiritual life. It's no longer your spiritual life. It's a spiritual life mediated to you. And not only that, it's mediated to you in the terms that this is the will of God for you. Okay. So it's very difficult. Then you have a burden of conscience. If I'm not following that spiritual direction, then I'm not following God and God's not happy with me. And so I have to try harder if it's difficult. Okay. So this is a disaster. This is for anybody with real spiritual maturity, they're going to think this is an absolute utter disaster because that person's independence, a person's ability to relate to God uh, directly has been removed from them, and not only removed from them, it's been replaced with something formulaic, something directive, something from a textbook, something that where God just cannot get through. And God will try anything, any way to get through to people, even through awful spiritual direction, but it makes it so much harder. And so he's creating this submissiveness, dependence on of many lay people on an institution. And let's not forget that if you don't please that institution as a numerary or assistant numerary, they reserve the right to kick you out and give you nothing whatsoever. And that's happened to many assistant numeraries who've been broken physically and psychologically. Also about internal administrators, numeraries who've maybe raised issues or had difficulties or been kicked out. Go back to their family, find your own way, because there's nothing. So this is this spiritual direction makes people an absolute pawn of an institution, takes away their freedom. And it's no wonder that over time, the majority of celibate members of Opus Dei end up on medication or worse. So, and it always seems so innocent at the beginning, but this is where you need real maturity, you need real spiritual wisdom, and you need the wisdom of the whole church or even beyond the church. Um, because there isn't wisdom of God just in the Catholic Church. And anyway, we could talk about that for a long time, but the Catholic Church has got very deep and rich experience of spiritual direction, and the rest of the Catholic Church is sharing that with each other. But Opus Dei insulates themselves away from it with this nonsense, like it's the rest of the Catholic Church is the bad shepherd. Um, so my hope is that at some point, Catholic Church decides we need to license spiritual directors in Opus Dei, or every spiritual director, but the ones who've gone through the proper training by the church, you just give them a certificate. But the ones who are doing their own thing, you need to license them and look into what they're doing. And really, the issue for anybody to become free in Opus Dei, they need to have no spiritual direction for a long time. Okay, and this sounds terrible. Okay, but they need to be assured that they're not going to be kicked out. They don't have to go elsewhere. They can if they want, but they don't. There's going to be no spiritual direction within Opus Dei. And that is critically important for the psychological and spiritual welfare of everybody in Opus Dei. Just stop the spiritual direction because it's too much, it's too heavy, it's creating zombies, making people into zombies. With the best will in the world, you want them to be helpful, you want to help, but it's following a system which can't let them be free to have their own relationship with God. And there's a fundamental lie at the heart of that system is that the will of God is mediated through the directors. It's not. It's the opposite. Okay, it's the opposite. It can't possibly be mediated through the will of the directors. You have to follow your own path, and real spiritual directors are very sensitive, accompany you, and are very careful not to impose, not to give rules, and to be careful and to sense if you're feeling scruples and you have to follow, they won't continue. Real spiritual directors will say, look, no, you need to go your own way before you come back with spiritual direction because you're too scrupulous about this. Okay, and I'm sure that happens. Maybe even happens in Opus Dei on occasion, but it's not the norm. Okay, so please, Catholic Church, license Opus Dei, okay? Make them go and first of all take away their faculties, take away, tell them very clearly, stop giving each other spiritual direction, stop giving everybody spiritual direction because it needs to be reviewed in great detail, okay? And find a way, if necessary, a canonical way to make it difficult for them to do it if they carry on anyway. So that's that anybody with any spiritual wisdom in the Catholic Church will know that what I'm saying is makes sense. Okay, even though I'm not a Catholic. Okay, I've been around long enough to know what's what. I'm definitely a Christian. So thank you very much for listening.